The story I'm about to share with you happened almost 10 years ago. At the time, I was 17 years old, and like most teenagers, I was happy to lock myself away in my room with my laptop and headphones. In autumn of that year, my parents went up north for the weekend. We lived in Michigan, and the Upper Peninsula is famous for its scenery at that time of year. I was left in the house by myself for the entirety of the weekend, and thought nothing of it. I enjoyed my privacy, and didn't mind being alone. Our house was very old, and it was a modest dwelling, 2 floors and a basement. All the bedrooms were on the first floor, since the second floor was an unfinished attic. The house itself was about 8 miles from the nearest town. The backyard was very large, with an even larger cornfield stretching out acres and acres, separating the property from the lake on the other side of the trees. The cornfield stretched partially around our house, creating a wall between the house and the neighbors to the east. It wasn't isolated by any means. There were 5 other neighbors nearby, 1 on each side, and the others across the street. It was on a quiet road, very little traffic, and only the occasional coyote howl would disrupt the night. A nice calm place to live. Day 2 of my weekend alone was a chilly evening, so I shut my window and locked it before I huddled into my bed with my laptop. I've always been a big fan of urban legends, especially the ones that have some truth woven in. Truth always makes a good story better, and makes a scary story all the more frightening. I had no idea that that night I was going to be part of a scary tale of my own. While I was zoning out on my laptop, watching horror videos and reading stories online, I heard an odd noise over my headphones. I pulled one speaker away from my ear and focused on the sound. It was coming from my window. My bedroom is on the corner, and as a result, I have 2 windows. One facing my neighbor on the west, and the other was facing the backyard. It was the second window that had the strange noise. At first I thought it was leaves and loose branches that were being blown against the screen, since it was fall, and the weather in Michigan can get pretty harsh and unpredictable. But my reasoning didn't quite fit in with the sound. It was a banging, or a rattling. It was like metal wires snapping. I removed my headphones, and used my laptop screen as a light to see where I was walking. The curtains and blinds were both drawn, preventing anything outside from being seen from the inside, where I was. I was nervous about looking out. I was alone, and I had no idea what was going on. I hugged my wall as I slipped my fingers under the curtains. Slowly and carefully, I pulled down one of the blinds so I could take a look outside. There, standing in the darkness, outside my window, was a person holding a knife. He was cutting at my screen. My heart skipped a beat, and my blood ran cold. My instincts told me not to make a sound, and to stay out of sight. I slid down my wall, and crawled on my hands and knees to the small table next to my bed. Then I called 911, and whispered everything to the person on the other line. I told them someone was outside my window with a knife, and that I was all alone. The operator stayed on the line with me, and kept reassuring me that the police were on their way. That did little to calm my nerves, though, because I could hear my screen being cut open. I kept telling her I wanted to run, but she insisted that I stay put, and to not make a sound. Suddenly, the sound stopped. I listened, and almost screamed in fear when I heard a new sound. The knife was digging into the wooden frame of the window, and the man tried to pry it open from the outside. Just then, I noticed a red and blue light flashing in the backyard. It was the police car arriving, and I could see it through my window. I listened carefully, and heard someone running from the car to the backyard. I could also hear their radio clicking on and off as they checked the area. A loud knock at the front door made me jump. I heard a man call out for me, identifying himself as a cop. Still scared, I opened my bedroom door and crept down the hall. I peeked into the living room and didn't see anything. The knocking persisted, and again, the cop identified himself. I peeked through the window and saw him standing there, his eyes still checking the yard. I flung open the door and almost pulled him inside my house, just happy to see someone else. He asked if I was okay, and if I could give a description of the man that I saw. I couldn't. He was wearing all black, and had a hood pulled up, covering his face in a shroud of darkness. All I could do was describe the large hunting knife he used to cut my screen. Another officer joined us on the front porch and told us he didn't see anything in the area. I kept insisting that I'd seen someone, and they of course believed me, since the patrolling cops saw the damage to the screen. The officers did a second sweep of the property and made sure that every single window was secured and that the doors were locked and the garage was secure. Before leaving, the officers told me that they would keep a patrol car in the area, but they were confident that whoever it was wouldn't be back. They just figured it was a teenager trying to break in, and that he got scared when he saw the police arrive. I thanked them and proceeded to double-check the locks myself. I wanted to call my mom, but I knew my parents were already on their way home, and they'd be back in the morning. Unable to go back into my room, I chose to sleep on the couch in the living room and tell my parents as soon as they walked in the front door. About an hour later, after I was finally able to relax, I started to drift off to sleep on the couch. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang against my back door. I sat straight up and looked through the kitchen to the back door. I heard the bang again. This time, I knew I was in danger. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed 911 again. This time, I ran into the kitchen and grabbed a large knife from the butcher's block and huddled on the floor against the counter and the cabinets. I pressed the phone to my ear as the operator, a man this time, continued to talk to me so I didn't feel alone. The banging continued. I gripped the knife tighter and began mentally trying to psych myself up. If this man managed to get inside, would I be able to defend myself? He had a knife. Maybe that's why I grabbed one too, but I didn't know anything about him. How tall was he? How strong was he? Did I even stand a chance? I heard the wood on the door frame crack. The old door was locked by a chain. One more hard kick would surely break down the door. I prepared for the final bang, which I was certain would cause the door to open. Just then, I heard a voice yelling over the banging noise. "Get on the ground. Drop the knife." It was the cops. They were there. The operator on the line, who had been speaking to me throughout the entire ordeal, continued to try to keep me calm. Then I heard another bang, but it wasn't from someone kicking the back door. It was a gunshot, then silence. A gentle knock at the front door drew my attention. The same cop as before was at the front door. I told the operator that the officer was here, and we hung up. I swung the door open, knife still in my hand. The cop saw it, and calmly suggested that I put it down. My hand was gripping the knife so tightly that my knuckles were white, and my fingers were cramped. When I dropped the knife, he escorted me to the front door and to his car, which was parked on the side yard. Under the motion lights of my backyard, I could see another police officer standing over the body of a man in black. I could see his knife lying on the ground just inches from his hand, and even from the distance, I knew there was blood on the knife. The man himself looked like he'd been dead for weeks. His hood had fallen from his face, revealing it to the night. He was impossibly white and pale. His skin was unnaturally aged with heavy wrinkles and lots of discoloration. His hair was long, stringy, and blonde. His eyes, still open, were sunken into his skull. I was taken to the police station to deliver a statement and to ensure that there were no other attackers on my property. I told everything I knew to the interviewing cop, and another one walked into the room with a file in his hand. He whispered something to the first cop and handed him the file. Then I asked them if they knew who the man was, and he nodded. I probed further and asked who he was and what he wanted. The first officer didn't want to tell me, but I needed to know. I managed to coax him into revealing it, but part of me wishes that I'd just let it go. The man was a chronic drug addict and a violent schizophrenic with bipolar disorder. He used to live in the area until he was finally locked up in a mental hospital about 20 years prior. The incident that got him locked away all those years ago was a result of an attempt to burn down a local church. He believed that he was the true Son of God and that all religious figures, priests and ministers, were false prophets and tools of Satan. The police suspected that he was trying to break into my house because he thought that a local preacher lived there. He had the wrong place, but he would have killed me anyway if he'd gotten in. After a moment of bewilderment, I asked them why they didn't see him the first time. His answer sent chills up my spine, and now I never look into my backyard the same. He told me that the man had been hidden in the cornfield the first time and was watching the house from between the rows. He had never left. He was always there, watching the house and waiting for the police to leave. He was truly crazy, and I'm glad he won't be around anymore. One night, I was in my bed when I heard my dog crying downstairs. I thought my dog Rufus needed to be let out to do his business, so I made my way down the stairs to the living room where I thought I heard him, but he wasn't there. I looked down the hallway that leads to the front door. I even checked my laundry room, but he wasn't there either. I went to the last place that I could look downstairs, which was my kitchen. I entered and turned on the lights, and then I instantly froze in fear. There in my kitchen was a man wearing a black hoodie and a white porcelain mask, holding a bloody knife. I could see the man's crazed eyes looking at me through the white mask, but he remained perfectly still, just watching me. I let out a scream of utter terror and ran back down the hallway into the laundry room and locked myself in, which was a stupid and panicked decision. Now I was stuck in my house with this intruder. I had no phone to call for help, and only a flimsy door lock separating me from this masked man. I cowered in the corner of my laundry room and heard slow-paced footsteps coming down the hallway towards the room. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and shortly after, I heard the sound of a knife being scraped against the door. What I heard next will haunt me for the rest of my life. The man said something in the creepiest, most disturbing, blood-chilling voice. "Sarah," which is my name. I could hear the man on the other side of the door giggling as he continued to scrape his knife against it. This went on for what seemed like hours, and I must have blacked out or something, because I remember waking up on the floor of the laundry room. I could see the daylight through the bottom of the laundry room door, and there seemed to be no noise coming from outside. I took a chance and booked it out of my house to the neighbors. The neighbors called the police, and I waited for them to arrive. Once they got there, I explained the situation to them. A few more cops showed up, and they entered my house, guns drawn. After a while, they came back out, and one of them approached me. He said, "We checked everywhere and found no one, but we did find bloody scrape marks outside your laundry room door, and the corpse of a dog that's been stabbed to death lying on the bed in the upstairs master bedroom. I'm sorry." I began to bawl my eyes out. That psycho came into my house and took poor Rufus away from me. I hate him. It's been years since this dreadful night, and I've never really gotten over it. I still see a therapist to this day. I still cry about what happened to poor Rufus sometimes. He was a beautiful golden retriever that was given to me by my closest friend. I loved that dog. I moved out of that place shortly after it happened. I just couldn't live there anymore. The scariest thing is, I can still feel the man in the porcelain mask watching me. It's like he's always with me, in my nightmares. Several years ago, my family lived in a sketchy area of a small town in South Carolina. Our neighbor 2 doors down was a well-known drug dealer, and there were always shady people walking up and down our street and through our yard late at night. My fiancé is a night owl, and I work nights, so we were always up late. My daughters weren't in school yet, and thankfully, they liked to sleep in as much as we did, so it wasn't uncommon for me and my fiancé to be up at 2 or 3 in the morning. We didn't have curtains or blinds on most of our windows, so it was obvious that we were awake and in our brightly lit living room late at night. Everyone in the neighborhood was also familiar with our 2 German Shepherd dogs. Our female was around 160 pounds, and our male was around 120. They could also both be seen through the window at night by anyone looking in. For a few weeks, we'd been having issues hearing some sounds outside our windows at night, but when we went to check, there would typically be no one there. We'd often find nothing but a pry bar near the window where they'd been trying to get in. By the time we moved from that neighborhood, we had a collection of pry bars that we'd found outside that window of our house. My fiancé had drilled holes through both wooden frames of each window and held them in place with 3-inch nails. That way they couldn't be opened without removing the nails. One night, we were sitting in the living room at around 3 in the morning when we heard a sound outside one of the windows. The dogs were sitting in front of the window, just growling and staring at us, and when we looked outside, we could see a guy trying to pry it open. We both stood in front of the window staring at him. The dogs were barking, but he was so drugged up, he apparently didn't even notice us, and just stood there. My fiancé knocked on the glass, and then he ran off. Then we headed outside to grab the pry bar. We figured that would be the end of it, but the next night, the same guy was back again. This time at a different window, the one in the living room. The process repeated, with my fiancé knocking on the window and scaring him off, and then we would collect the pry bar. When he showed up for a third night, we decided we'd had enough. This time, instead of knocking on the window, my fiancé went outside without alerting him. My fiancé stepped onto the back porch. He was 6'5", skinny, and he used a cane to walk a large portion of the time, so despite his height, he appears pretty non-threatening. When the guy noticed him, he didn't try to run. Apparently thinking he could take him, they stared at each other for a few minutes. Then when the guy raised his pry bar, like he was going to move towards my fiancé, all hell broke loose. My fiancé, despite using a cane, is fast when he needs to be. In an instant, he popped open the front door, releasing both of the dogs, and at the same time, pulled a machete out of the back of his pants. The guy took off. My fiancé and the dogs chased them for a while, and eventually let the guy go. I've never seen anybody run so fast, and to be honest, it was quite an amusing sight.